I know most of us here are familiar with the whole idea of praying and asking God to help us with things. And we're also familiar with the whole idea of witnessing for Jesus and how you can really witness for him. A lot of us think about maybe giving a Bible study, or we've heard about our parents saying, I got to give a Bible study in order to witness for Jesus. But, you know, it's interesting. My husband is a dentist, and he has a practice with all type of employees working there. And most of them are not necessarily people who would go to church every weekend, but they're people that are comfortable with Christianity. And so he has always prayed at staff meetings, and if ever they have meals together, they always pause and ask, wait for him to have prayer over the meal. And so he's kind of had what I would call a prayer witnessing ministry with his office staff. And then he's also included with that playing a certain type of music more commonly in his practice than what would be more typical, more Christian-flavored music. And so they're familiar with this. Well, his staff, they all agreed together that they wanted to work really hard and kind of try to get enough money set aside so they could go on a trip together, a kind of a staff bonding trip. And they worked really hard. It takes a long time to do this, sometimes more than a couple years. To get enough set aside to do a trip. And everybody was all excited, and they've had it on the schedule and everything, and sure enough, it worked out to do it this spring, so they scheduled it in. And we were going to go to the Dominican Republic together. And he says they can all bring a spouse with them. The spouse has to pay their own way, but they can bring a spouse with them. So by the time we were ready to go on the trip, we had 21 people that were going on this trip. 2 of them did their own flight, but 19 of us were all flying together in this big group. And we got from Michigan to Florida. We got to Miami, and we were waiting to catch our connector flight out to Dominican Republic, and we hear over to the loudspeakers, XYZ flight is canceled. And so there we are, sitting in the airport in Florida with 19 people. And you could immediately, the line to the associate to help you change flights, our girls that were kind of facilitating the trip details, they ran to get to that line, but they were already about 6 people back by the time they got in line. And so then, Brock's niece and nephew were with us, Cherie and Austin, and I went over there to them, and Brock was sitting with them, and we decided to pray together. Amen. So we were praying, and then I went over and talked with some of the dental assistants that were kind of gathered together talking, and they said, we need to pray about this. The one girl, her husband was raised as a missionary in Brazil. And so they're more active as Christians in their church. And so we thought we should pray about it. So then I went back to talk to Brock, and we prayed again. And it was 2 hours we were waiting in that place. And then one of the guys, who's the girl who was kind of trying to make something happen and trying to get us another place, he noticed that she was just ready to start talking to the associate. And they were talking, and they had figured they got the right associate, because it depends who you get. What they're going to do or what track they're going to take. And he comes running back, and he's not really what I would say a devout Christian type of person, but he comes back to Brock, and he says, my wife sent me back here, and she asked me to get you to pray, so do your thing. So she had just started talking with the associate. So Brock started praying. He went back to his wife, and within less than a minute, it seemed like, he came running back and said, we have got to go. We've got to go to gate XYZ. They're holding the plane for us. So we ran, and it ended up taking us 7 hours to get where we were supposed to go instead of the 3 or whatever it was supposed to. But we got there together, and everybody for the entire rest of the week that they were there commented almost every day about how they really believed it was a God thing, and if it was only because we prayed. So I know that that's made a long-term impact in their hearts, and I think you kids can think about that just praying with people, just saying, I'll pray for you. If somebody has something happen, if they hurt themselves, if, young children, you might meet kids who maybe something's happened with their pet. Just them knowing that you're a Christian, knowing that you have faith in God and that you'll pray about things, it has an impact. Even the Thai people that I'm talking about at this business, the reason they ended up talking to me about Christianity is because their uncle got sick with COVID. It triggered cancer. He ended up with cancer, and I started praying for the uncle. And every time I came back to their business, I asked how the uncle was doing. And, said, I'll keep praying for him. And they're Buddhist. So, and they have the little idol down, by their business thing. And so I've talked very open with them. But you don't really have to give a Bible study always to impact people for Jesus. And people can come to you if they know, when there's a difficulty, they may come to you because they know you're a Christian and they feel the need of prayer. So I think that's something to remember.
Baskets. Thank you. For our scripture reading today, we have a responsive reading on page 697 of our hymnal. We go to the back, page 697. This is a portion, chapter Psalm 66 from the new NIV, New International Version. Number 697. And we'll have a responsive reading here. I'll read the light print, and if the congregation would read the darker print. Shout with joy to God, all the earth. Sing to the glory of his name. Offer him glory and praise. Praise our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard. He has preserved our lives and kept our feet from slipping. For you, O God, tested us. You refined us like silver. You brought us into prison and laid burdens on our backs.
You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and water, but you brought us to a place of abundance.
I will come to your temple with burnt offerings and fulfill my vows to you. Vows my lips promised and my mouth spoke when I was in trouble.
Come and listen, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he has done for me. I cried out to him with my mouth. His praise was on my tongue.
If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God has surely listened and heard my voice in prayer.
Praise be to God,
who has not rejected my prayers or withheld his love from me. Amen. Okay, now it's time for the message that Pastor Calkins has prepared and the Lord has inspired him with to share with us this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Happy Sabbath. It's so good to be with you. And I have learned that God is good and can be trusted. So we had that responsive reading about praising God because of hard times. You notice that in there? We're looking at hard times as we're reading Daniel chapter 1. And these 4 young men who managed to not merely survive the hard times, but rise to the glory of God. Story starts when Nebuchadnezzar came and surrounded Jerusalem and overtook it. This was the first of 3 times that Nebuchadnezzar would destroy Jerusalem. This was the lightest touch. He just stole some stuff from the temple. He didn't completely ransack the temple, just some of the nicest stuff. That same stuff comes up later with Belshazzar, but we're not going to get into that today. Daniel and his friends were probably not the only ones that got kidnapped that day. But they were the ones who said, guys, let's do this right. God had designed that their parents gave them names. Well, parents always give names, don't we? And these names that were given, these children knew what their name was and what it meant. Do you know what your name means? Some of you do. I'm named after my daddy, so that's pretty simple. He's the senior, I'm the junior. And that's a common way. So my name is that I am supposed to grow up to be as good a man as my daddy was. Sometimes that can be big shoes to fill. But these 3 young men weren't given such common names as that. They were given names which pointed to God. All 4 of these names have a God element to them. And some of you have this in your name, and you may or may not have known it. Daniel, the L on the end of the name talks of Elohim. That's one of the most powerful names for God. And of course, in Hebrew doesn't have as big a vocabulary as we do. We've got 100,000 words in English. They have probably 10. So that they don't have as many words. And so each word has to do more duty, which makes it so that when they say God, there's some other things that come in to help understand that. And one of them is mountain. This El Elohim is related to the big, beautiful mountain. It's also related to the supplies of food that comes from the breast. So this is pretty rich. This is God who supplies my needs. And he's big. Well, we need a big God when we get kidnapped. So, next one on the list, Hananiah. The on the end is Yahweh. It's part of that Yahweh name, the self-existent one. That's a phenomenal recognition of who God is. But you probably know somebody not named Hananiah, but related to this name, because Hannah is in this, Anna, and what this means, the Anna is grace. So God provides grace for my life, or to say it real plainly, the grace of God. I didn't tell you what Daniel meant. Daniel is God is my judge. So Daniel grew up knowing that God cared what happened in his life. Hananiah grew up knowing that God's grace was active in his life. Mishael, the next one in this list, who is like God. And you probably know somebody named Michael or Michelle. This name is still being used. In fact, Daniel's very much used. All these names, they endure, and for good reason. The next one, not so much. Azariah, God has helped, is what Azariah means. And you catch the L or the in all of these names have this reference to God. But Azariah means God is my helper, or God has helped. So Here we have God as my judge. We have the grace of God. We have one who is recognizing he's supposed to live like God, Michael, who is like God, and God is my helper. And they just kind of got together and says, we're going to have to help each other, but let's live for Jesus. You'll find opportunities to get close to somebody and say, let's do this together. It happens in families, it happens in business, it happens in school, in your relationships. Make this commitment. I'll help you, and I expect you to help me. We'll be accountability partners. We'll carry this through. Well, they were committed to living up to their names. But you remember what happened when they got to Babylon? The king said, I want some of the best of these young men, and I don't think that Daniel and his friends were the only 4 that got chosen. I think there were some others that Nebuchadnezzar said, we're going to send them to college, we're going to give them some training so that we can set them up as rulers. We'll send them back to Jerusalem and put them in charge. We'll make them loyal to us, and they look like Hebrews, and they are, but they're loyal to us. So it's really a slick plan, and it worked often. These men were very useful. But they said, no, we've got to live for Jesus first. Then we can be loyal to our boss. Keep that in mind. You've got a job. Most of us have had a job somewhere along. You should be loyal to your boss, but be loyal to God first. Most of the time, there's not a conflict, but every once in a while, you'll say, wait a minute, what this company's doing, what my boss has asked me to do, there's some falsehood going on here, some dishonesty going on here, I can't live for God first. So that's what Daniel and his buddies agreed on. All right. They were given some new names, and you may know what their names were. Probably half of you have a nickname. Well, probably all of you have a nickname, but some of you don't admit it or recognize it. But nicknames are kind of fun things. They can be logical. Tall man that gets called Shorty. Person with red hair that gets called Red. You know, sometimes they're logical, sometimes they're not. They may be something that you like or something you don't like. With the name Fred, you would have thought that I had got called Freddie. Well, there's probably only 10 people that I remember that have ever called me with the Freddie. That just doesn't fit me. I'm Fred, and that's who I am. But just this week, I was talking to a lady that rode the bus with me when I was riding to Tustin School, and she says, we called you Freddie on the bus. I've completely forgotten it. But that's a nickname, and it's not a wrong name. It's just I never identified with it. A friend of mine in one of my districts in central Kentucky, he's a coal miner, and in the coal mine, there's almost everybody gets a nickname, and there's somebody, it's not usually the boss, but it's a respected team member who gives out the nicknames. And so he gave this Adventist deacon the nickname Nixon, because that was back in the Nixon era when this Adventist deacon was so upset about our president misrepresenting integrity. And so when he said too much about how he was upset about that, they labeled him Nixon, and everybody called him Nixon. He just had to, that's who they're talking about. He had to suffer with it for years. He didn't like it. Nicknames. All right. Daniel and his friends are given new names by Nebuchadnezzar in order to switch their loyalty from the God that their original names gave loyalty to now this God of Babylon. All of these names had a tie to a Babylonian god. And now what you're going to do when your very name gives glory to a devil, a false god? Well, they had a trick. I believe that Daniel was given the name Belshazzar. And he looked that over and he said, I don't want to be worshiping Bel. And so he acted as if, and those of you who've ever had to try to learn a foreign language, you know that you will mispronounce, you will misstate, you will say something that is embarrassing. And Robert was telling me about stepping into the store and saying, good evening, everybody, and it's morning, and they look at him and they greet him, but he finally figures out that I didn't say it right. And it's so simple to say something just a little off when you're in a foreign language and you think you're doing right. I believe that Daniel added one consonant to his name so that instead of saying Bel, he said Belt. Belteshazzar. You'll find his name is listed in the Bible as Belteshazzar, and that name doesn't make any sense. But if you erase the T, you find, oh, he's a worshiper of Bel. Because Bel was one of their gods. Shadrach. Well, once Daniel's figured out a way to fuzz his name a little bit, Shadrach said, I can do that too. That is, Hananiah decided he could do that. I believe that his name was Shadrachu, because Raku is one of those gods. It's the moon god. And he didn't want to worship the moon god, so he dropped the U and just made it Shadrach. And so now it's confused. Similarly, we find Meshach dropped the U because he did not want to worship Marduk, one of the major gods of Babylon. And with Abednego, it's a similar but different change. When you learn a language, you learn it, start learning it in utero, okay? But there are at least 70 different sounds that we can make with our mouth. And in any given languages, it's about 25, 30, maybe as many as 40. Some have only closer to 15 different sounds that are made. Hawaiian is one of the poorest for how many different sounds are made. So, and some of them are really curious. Last camp meeting, I met a lady from Africa, southern part of Africa, and I just heard enough. I said, did you ever hear somebody that can speak that language that has clicks in it? And I can't even click as part of a word. But she says, oh, you're talking about klasa. It's click, klasa. I can't do the click at the same time I say klasa, but it's with that KL sound, it's the click. And she right off in that language, because that's one of the languages. If you live outside of North America, you probably have to know at least 2 languages just to survive. There's your birth language, but then there's the trade language. Most places in this world, you've got at least 2. How many languages do you have? No, talking to you. I know you've got at least 3.
Yeah, both
3. At least, yeah. My daughter Karen said there's 20 languages that she can find the bathroom and get food in. And you have this, how well do you need to know the language in order to count it? Which is why Mitch is hesitating, because there's probably another half a dozen anyway that he could find the bathroom and get food in. So, I believe that Belteshazzar is a mispronunciation of the name that he was given. Shadrach is a mispronunciation of the name that he was given. Meshach, again, and Abednego, it should have been Nebo. Nebuchadnezzar, Nebo was one of the gods. And instead of saying the B, he said it as a G. And if you didn't grow up with it, you might not even be able to say certain sounds. It can be hard to learn.
Jephthah really struggled with Lao when she first started learning it, partly because it's a tonal language. If you say a word with an inflection, so it's going a higher tone as you go along, that means one thing. If it's got the tongue drops as you say it, that means a whole different vocabulary word. You will get embarrassed. You will say what you didn't mean. It happens. So instead of Nebo, he said Nego. And I wonder, I can hardly wait to get to Glory and talk to these guys. I wonder if they just did it in-house, the four of them among each other, or I wonder if the rest of them laughed at them as they called Abed-Nebo, Abed-Nego, and they recognized we're making fun of these guys that can't even talk, but these guys that refused to say the word the way it was being given to them were saying, I'm not going to worship that false god. You have choices, and even if you're given a nickname you don't like, you have a choice. Live for Jesus. They were kidnapped, taken away from home. They said, I'm going to live for Jesus. They were given new names, and they said, I'm going to live for Jesus. And then, and this, we spent a lot of time on this one in Daniel chapter 1. Nebuchadnezzar said, guys, I'm going to give you the best food that I can give you. And I mean, he was telling the truth. He thought what he was giving them was the best that he could give them. It's the same food that the king ate. You're being fed from the king's table. You remember that passage? Verse 8, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested, very polite, he requested that he might not defile himself. That got hard. I mean, when somebody is giving you what they think is the best food, how are you going to handle that? Oh, I don't want to eat your food? That's rude. As my missionary kids interact in the families and somebody invites them to a meal, what you going to do? I'm a strict vegetarian. I can't eat any of the stuff that you've got on the table. You better be more polite than that. And there are ways. More than once, Bonnie and I, being invited out to dinner, Bonnie says, let me bring the entree. Just to kind of sidestep some things. Yes, we'll come and join you for a meal, and I'll bring something. And by her choosing what she brings, it can make it so that you're pretty safe eating bread. And most meals here in America, there's bread being served. You can make a workaround. I don't know what the right answer would have been. You all don't remember. I grew up in this church. I keep thinking that you would know us, but you may or may not know. My mother's father lived in Wisconsin, and we made half a dozen trips over to visit him. He was in an old folks home, military veterans home. Cross on the boat or drive through Chicago or through the UP, and we did them all, and none of them are good. It's still a long trip. For taking these children on a long trip, you know what I'm talking about. but we survived. On our way through the UP one time, we stopped at a cousin's house. And there's 6 or 7 of us kids, I don't know. It probably was before Florence was born, so probably only 6 of us, the children plus the parents. And they said, oh, while you're here, let's fix. And so they fried up a whole bunch of pork chops. There was a whole platter of pork chops that did not get eaten. I don't know what they're going to do about it, what they figured out of it, but we're not. Now, at that point, I still ate beef, but no. Daniel and his buddies had to face this. And they said, there are several issues with the food on the king's table that we cannot abide. Alcohol, oftentimes if you're in a group where there's alcohol being served, you turn your glass upside down and they know that means you don't want it and everything's fine. In our culture, some cultures it's not that simple. But This was going to be every day. We've got to make a stand. The problem with the meats that were there, even the clean meats, had been butchered at a temple in offering to that temple. So whoever eats this meat is worshiping that false god. That's a problem, even if it's clean meat. Alone, they, all around the world, the devil's pushed this. I learned when I was young that there's people around here that eat turtle. That's not a bit attractive to me. Then I went to Kentucky and learned some other recipes for things that I would have called roadkill. Robert grew up in Kentucky. He can probably tell you more stories than I can because he was in the culture. I did not know that. Okay. Yeah, and that's the way you live. But Daniel and his buddies had been raised to eat right, and they knew that there were some things that are appropriate and some things not. Now, our biggest danger here in this culture is not the flesh foods, or probably even the alcohol. It's the refined foods. The white flour and white sugar is what's killing America. But I digress. Daniel and his buddies, they said, here's what we would suggest you do with us. Give us a 10-day test. Praise God, 10 days is long enough to show a difference. When you choose to live by the principles of God's holy word, including diet, but also exercise and rest and water, the 8 natural doctors, when you make that choice, in 10 days, a difference can be seen. Now, with the CHIP program, we do 30 days, and we do physical tests at the beginning. 30 days later, we do another physical test, and it's measurable difference in those 30 days. Now, in Daniel's experience, 10 days, he's being compared to people who've gone through the similar crisis he has, but they're pigging out at the king's table. I know, I use that word deliberately. They are not exercising restraint. Gluttony is a serious issue, and it's a temptation when it's so sweet in the mouth. The rich foods, you can easily eat way more calories than is good for your body when it tastes so good. It's harder to pig out on lettuce and broccoli and carrots, okay? Now, the potatoes are okay, but when you slather them with fat, it can be not good for you. So, Daniel and his friends understood this, and they made some choices. And the other guys did not commit themselves to the way of righteousness. So in some ways, we've got a 20-day test because we have the ones who are choosing to live healthfully, maintaining and improving their health, and because they probably got starved on that 700-mile hike from Jerusalem to Babylon. The soldiers don't eat very well, and the captives don't eat any better on a long hike like that. Yeah. Things turned out amazingly well, and they were honored that they could eat what they chose to eat. Fruits, seeds, nuts, and vegetables. It's more than just lentils, like I first thought when I read King James, the word pulse, and asked my mother what that was. It's probably a fairly varied vegan diet. This made a big difference. Their education was impacted. When they came to the end of the test, the president of the college, Nebuchadnezzar, he was also the general and the king and an amazing man. I believe he gave them their oral exam, and at their oral exam, they came out to be 10 times wiser than anybody else in the class. That's the Bible phrase, 10 times wiser. I don't know what 10 times wiser is. I've taken spelling tests where there were 20 points possible, and somebody might get 20 points and somebody else 2 points. So you would say that's 10 times wiser. But these other classmates weren't duds either. And somebody that only gets two right in a spelling test either hasn't studied or just doesn't get it. Yeah, I mean, spelling's not that hard. Yeah. They blossomed for God's glory. And you keep reading the book and you find that they really, really blossomed for God's glory because of their commitment that started with saying, God has given me a name that I can live up to. Okay, let me bring this home and close it off. You have a name. You have a name that says Christian, which means like Christ. You have a name Seventh-day Adventist. Live up to that name. Whenever anybody meets you, whenever you interact with anybody, they should be able to say, they're Christian. The integrity, the truthfulness, the honesty, the pleasure that shines forth from someone who is like Christ is palpable. It's noticed by people. And the Seventh-day Adventist part? Adventist means we're looking forward to the coming of Jesus. That impacts how we live day by day. The way you take care of your place should show that your plans are for eternity. I'm steward of this earth, but I'm looking for there. And seventh day, our Sabbath keeping marks us. People recognize us as Sabbath keepers, and they recognize that makes a difference. It will impact your health, your longevity. Keeping Sabbath is very, very special, but it's a witness. People are drawn to Jesus because of our choices. So, we have chosen a song about Sabbath to close this. 388. Don't forget the Sabbath. The Lord our God has blessed. Of all the week the brightest, of all the week the best. It brings repose from labor. It tells of joy divine. Its beams of light descending with heavenly beauty shine. I invite you to stand together as we sing.
Song number 388.
It tells of joy divine.
May the Lord bless you and comfort you. May the Lord be gracious unto you and surround you with his love. May the Lord be with you through trials by day and by night, smiling his grace into your life, giving you his peace and healing rest. Amen.